Welcome to the Naughty Fisherman. This video, as the title describes, is going to be going over fluorocarbon and monofilament. So this is one of the biggest questions I see getting asked, or most common questions I see getting asked on a lot of the fishing forums online for beginners. Which is better? Which should I use? Answer that's kind of complicated. We're going to be jumping into it right now. Stay tuned to the end. I will be going over my recommendations about when you should use them and when you should not use them. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So before I launch into any lengthy explanations, just wanted to show you guys what I'm going to be going over. On the left, I have my fluorocarbon from Runkle. It's called Power Fluoro. It's about 1,000 yards a spool, 5 pounds. Love this stuff. And on my right, I have my old go-to, the Line premium monofilament. This stuff, like I said, huge spool, 3,350 yards. Awesome stuff. This is what you're going to be using. So let's go ahead and jump into explanations, and we are going to be starting with the monofilament first. Jumping into this, we're going to go ahead and start with the monofilament like I mentioned. What I have before me is a spool I bought probably a year and a half ago, honestly. It's Line super copolymer premium monofilament. So this stuff, biggest thing it has going for it is it's cheap. I think this spool right here, 3,350 yards, so a crap ton of line. It ran me, I think, $20 at the time. I think the price has gone up a little bit since then. I haven't really had to buy any since. But the number one thing going for monofilament line is its price point. This is the cheapest line per yard you will find on the market is monofilament. Reason being is this is pretty common. It's not hard to make. It's a single strand. That's what the mono stands for. So what you get, if I can get this thing to show up, is a clear line. In this case, I think, yep, this one's clear. They have things like smoke, moss green, all those different colors. But as you can see, you can barely see this. So it has great invisibility in the water. Not complete, but it's very hard for the fish to see this. Now, going into the disadvantages of this. So, unfortunately, this one does come with a lot of cons. It tends to absorb the water, which is not great if you want to do any kind of fishing in extreme temperatures, because it'll take on the water. So if you're ice fishing, strongly recommend going against this, because, yeah, it's going to absorb the water and freeze, which means it could probably snap real easily. Another con it has going for it right now is that it can be damaged by the sun. So if you're leaving your line out, or you're doing a lot of trips out and you have long days on the water, eventually this will start to deteriorate because the sun will wear away at it. So it is not UV resistant. It will take that on and just start breaking down. So eventually this will have to get replaced much faster than its counterpart fluoro. The other thing you gotta worry about when you're casting with this is, since it's similar to water's density, when you cast this out, if you're looking for a line that's going to sink, this will not do it. Since it's similar to water, it's literally, you're just going to see it floating on the surface. So you will need weights to get it anywhere below the water surface and where you want it. That is a disadvantage if you're looking for a sinking line. The other problem you're going to be looking out for is if you're doing a lot of fishing in abrasive environments, so like you got a lot of rocks, a lot of snag areas. When you drag this over it, it's going to start wearing away at the line. So you will have weak spots in your line, and it's just going to start tugging and snapping. Another detriment to this one, like I said, there's a lot, it's the cheap stuff, is when you start hooking into fish a lot, this is going to start taking on memory. So what we're talking about when we're talking about memory is, if I were to get a fish on this, just start pulling, you guys can see how my hands are literally just pulling away from each other. That line, if I'm fighting a fish and it's just tugging it everywhere, it's gonna rip this line apart. So what'll happen is, when I come in, a lot of times what I've had to do in the past was bring my line in, get the fish off, if I got lucky enough to bring him in, and then what I would have to do is I'd have to find the damaged area and find the undamaged area and literally cut my line. So I would have to cut the damaged part off and throw it out. Because eventually, if you do that enough times, you're going to be fighting a fish and it's just going to snap from all the wear and tear on the line. So those are the cons, unfortunately, of monofilament. Now, let's go into the pros. Once again, this is the cheapest line on the market per yard, as opposed to fluoro and in another video I'll go over, braid. So this is, if you are on a budget, this spool is probably one of the best things you can do. Most of your reels, I should say, aren't going to take more than, I want to say, 200 to 240 of this 4-pound. It'll take 240 yards. Now, if you're looking at this number right here, 240 out of 3,350 yards, you still got over 3,000 yards after you do one rod. So if you're doing like multiple rods at a time, monofilament might be your best option, especially if you're just looking to get out there on the water and you don't mind replacing the line pretty often. Well, yes, it will wear and tear and it'll go down. If you're only spending $20 maybe once or twice a year, it'll keep you fishing for a while, even if you do have to replace it. Replacing it might be a pain, but the cost ratio might be worth it to you. I know I've looked into various sizes, and while I have this one, the 2-pound test, which is ultra finesse line, and I suck at that, so I don't have any. It's about 6,000 yards for the same price as this one. So I think it might be $1 or $2 different, but like I said, 6,000 yards. If you're planning on just using that for leaders, or even if you're just planning on spooling up your entire reel with that, you're only going to be able to put about 300 yards at a time on there. At 6,000 yards, you're still looking at probably a year before you need to buy a line again. So if you're looking for the most line for your buck, monofilament's probably the way to go. It is super, super cheap. Now, while I did say the memory is a problem, you also have a slight advantage with mono, as when you are fighting in a fish, if you need to have that little extra give without it, like, going taut or snapping, monofilament is pretty good for that. Even though it does cause memory, it does have some give to it, which will allow this line to stretch. While that might not be great if you're jigging or drop shotting, what it is good for is if you're doing bait and weight. So if you get hit and you're starting to pull them in, both the rod and the line can give you some resistance to the fish and let the fish wear itself out rather than snapping. Granted, you'll have to replace it eventually, but it does have that advantage. It also does measure up the fluoro as far as knot strength. Honestly, a lot of times it's just going to depend on the type of knot you're doing. So you can do the Palomar knot with this, uni, improved clinch. All three are mainstays of this line. They will work beautifully. I've been doing this for 6-7 years, and I've used all three. They all work great with mono. I've never had problems with them. So it does kind of come to a draw with fluoro on that. There are some knots that might not be best for this. They are good for fluoro, but like I said, it just depends on what you're doing. But yeah, like I said, it may not hold up the best, but over time, they'll definitely bring the fish in. I've fished with this for years before I switched over to fluoro. Speaking of which, let's go into that. Okay, so the more expensive option. This right here is Runkle Fluorocarbon, 5-pound, 1,000 yard spool. I actually got turned on to this by another YouTuber that I went fishing with a few times. I love hanging out with him. Pretty sure a lot of you have already seen his channel, at Sea Spanker Outdoors. If you have not, check him out. The guy has taught me a lot over the last year. But yeah, he turned me on to this when I was still using my mono. I gotta say, I went to it and I've noticed a huge difference. So, reason being, you remember all those things I said about mono, how they were bad? So yeah, this doesn't really have that problem. However, it does have its cons as well, so don't think it's perfect. So, first off, this stuff actually repels water. So if you're looking for something that you don't have to worry about the water getting stuck on it or absorbing it, this will definitely help because it just literally just repels the water from it. So when you got this in the water, it's just gonna go nope and sink. That's another pro right there. If you're looking for a line that can sink in the water, so if you're doing anything like fly fishing, jigging, this is probably a better bet than your monofilament, only because it's going to sink in the water and aid in that bait getting to the depths you want. That, and it does not get damaged by UV rays. So UV will actually go through this one. So so it doesn't actually have to worry about the whole breaking down by sunlight, so it'll last a lot longer. It does have really good knot strength. Like I said, it does compare to mono in that case. They do not cancel each other out. One of them's not better than the other. It just depends on the knots you're using. So if you're using like some crazy knots that I've yet to hear about, this might be an option, or a mono might be an option. It just really comes down to experimentation and how your knots are tied. It does not suffer from one of the problems mono does a lot of times. When you're tying knots, this one will be more, I want to say friction resistant. Like, you still have to lubricate it, otherwise it will cut into it. That is one problem that mono does face. This does not. But it is still very abrasion resistant. So if you're fishing in a lot of cover or a lot of rocks, this might be a better option because it can take some beatings before it'll actually break. The other thing that's really good about this stuff is it does not stretch. It's really just, it's going to take a hit and it's just going to stay there and look at it and go, okay, you hit me. Let me just send that signal up the rod. So this stuff, it's kind of like braid in that regard, where it really doesn't have any give. So if you're jigging and you get hit, you'll know. You'll definitely feel it. That's why a lot of times this gets used as leader material and people who are jigging. The other thing is, this is good for ice fishing if you're going to get into that, which personally, I probably will never do that. I don't like the cold. But this is not really affected by extreme temperatures. So if it's really hot or really cold and you're fishing in the ice, this is going to shrug it off. So instead of getting all brittle and breaking off like mono might, this is just going to shrug off the temperatures and keep working just fine. Now, I've said all these wonderful things about this, right? On to the cons. So really, the only thing I can think of that's really a huge con is the price point on this. So as you guys can see, I have a 5-pound, 1,000 yard spool. This ran me around $23. So to give you an idea, let's bring the other one in real quick. Okay, 3,300 yards versus 1,000 yards. Same price. So if you are looking to get a ton of line because you're worried you're going to start breaking off, or you're getting new to it and you might have to cut your line off a lot, I honestly would not recommend starting out with this. It might be great if you're already into the sport like I was, and you get recommended to it and you're looking to step your game up and get the extra sensitivity. But if you're just starting out, this may not be the best option, only because of its price point. And let's face it, if you're having to replace this frequently because you're cutting your line off or you're getting snagged and everything like that, this gets expensive fast. So 1,000 yards, if you're doing, I want to say 200 to 250, depending on the size of your reel, because it's equivalent to 4-pound, you're looking at maybe 4 or 5 respools before you have to buy another spool. Whereas with mono, you're looking at probably 10 or more. So on price point, this one loses out big time. However, it comes with a lot of advantages. So you have to think about what you're looking for. Are you looking to stay budget-wise, or are you looking for ultra sensitivity, or are you looking to step up your game? It just comes down to what you want. The other thing is, if you're used to getting a lot of give, so if you've been fishing with monofilament and you haven't tried this before and you're used to that give, this will not have that. So it does fight the memory issue that mono seems to have pretty well for a longer period of time. So when you get hit on this, if I can grab it, this is running away from me. So when you get hit on this, so you guys can see, my hand's really not moving. I'm tugging on that, and my hand's not moving. It's slipping through my fingers, but it's not actually stretching. Like you saw with the mono where it stretched. This will not stretch. It has very little give in it. It is very, very resistant to that, which is where sensitivity comes from. But yeah, let's go ahead and just go over the last things. So as you can see, honestly, the answer to which is better really doesn't have a solid answer. If you're just getting into the sport, I would definitely recommend monofilament, even with all the detriments to it. Just because if you're just starting out, chances are you're going to be getting a lot of snarls, a lot of bird nesting, which is when your line tangles up at your spool. You're going to be getting caught up into a lot of things.
You're going to be hopefully catching fish, but you're going to be going through a lot of trial and error. And for the price, monofilament will get you started, and you won't have to worry about snapping it off and how often you have to replace it. It might get annoying, but it'll also kind of get you introduced to the sport, give you a little bit more stretch. You're bringing in a fish, so if you're fighting in like a 4 or 5 pound trout, if you're lucky, it'll give you that little bit of extra stretch to release some of the stress on that line. It'll make it a little easier to bring them in and play with them instead of, you know, just kind of jerking around and snapping it off because you pulled too hard or they pulled too hard, vice versa. It'll just have that little bit of extra give in it. That'll give you a little bit of wiggle room as you're pulling them in. With fluoro, if you're not a beginner fisherman, so if you've been fishing for a while and you're looking to step up to the next level, like you want more sensitivity, or you're looking to get into a little more active fishing than bait and weight, so things like mini jigs, drop shot, things like that require a more sensitive line, that would be when I would recommend doing fluorocarbon, or if you just want the extra sensitivity and durability and you don't mind spending a little bit more. As I mentioned before, monofilament, you can get about, if you're buying like the big spools like I have, you can get about 3,000 yards for $20 versus with fluorocarbon, especially with the Runkle I have. It's 1,000 yards for same, if not a little bit more, about $23. So you just kind of got to balance your price points versus what you need. Like I said, if you're just starting out, I strongly recommend going with monofilament. It'll get you into the game. It'll be a little cheaper. You might have to replace the line a little more often, but it'll definitely give you the experience you need to get into the sport. I would recommend fluorocarbon if you're going to be doing ice fishing, which I honestly gotta say you're a little crazy at that point, but more power to you. Or if you're looking to get the extra sensitivity. Beyond that, guys, I don't have much else. Tight knots and tight lines. Till next time.